Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm Senior Religion Reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. Joining me is Senior Managing Editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
Before we start, here's a quick ask. We invite you to go to patreon.com, where you can access all the Tribune's faith coverage, ad-free podcast episodes, and the full Mormon Land newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's show. By all accounts, Richard Bushman could be considered the patriarch of Mormon history. For more than 9 decades, he has lived it, studied it, analyzed it, shared it with fellow believers, and explained it to non-believers. The soft-spoken scholar with 3 degrees from Harvard and a drive towards understanding truth has been writing about Mormonism for much of his academic career. He is a giant in his field, as well as a mentor to many young historians. He penned a seminal biography of Joseph Smith, founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and later published an examination of the importance of Smith's, quote, gold plates, from which sprang the Book of Mormon. To many, Bushman is a dream representative of the Utah-based faith, quiet, reasoned, faithful but open, and willing to ask hard questions. So what has he seen of the church in his 94 years? What eras were most difficult, most satisfying? What struggles has he faced as a member, and where does he see the church in the 21st century as compared to when he was born? As he writes his memoirs, Bushman joins us from his home in New York City, where he is an emeritus professor of history at Columbia, to reflect on the past and imagine the future. Richard, welcome.
Thank you.
So happy to talk to you again. Okay, let's start at the beginning. How many church presidents have you seen, and who was the first one?
I haven't numbered them, but I began with Heber J. Grant, I think a kinsman of yours, and followed them right down to President Oaks. So I've seen them all.
Did you have a favorite?
Oh, I couldn't say that. They all have their winning characteristics. Every one of them is distinctive. We say, well, there is a prophet who leads the church, and that's fundamental. But the prophets are all so different. They have temperaments, they have preferences, they have styles. And I've enjoyed every last one of them.
Was David O. McKay the one of your, I want to say, young adulthood?
Yes, I met him in the mission home in Cambridge when I was a missionary. So he's someone I met personally. Not all the others have I known personally, but and I remember him. He had, he was very tall, so he sort of loomed over me as a missionary, shaking hands with him. And he had an eye. He had a way of sort of looking at you that was, like he was piercing through you. It was a little bit intimidating. On the other hand, he was a very generous person, a little bit aristocratic. There was something quite marvelous about him.
What other ones have you met? I'm pretty sure you knew Russell Nelson and probably Dallin Oaks.
Those two I've known quite well. Elder Nelson, when he was a surgical fellow at Mass General, was in the our same ward and stake, so I got to know him fairly well. Even then, I'd been in the mission presidency when I was a missionary, and he always called me President Bushman, reminding me of my past and warning me not to depart from it.
What about Gordon Hinckley?
Gordon Hinckley, I didn't know as well personally, but of course we're all very. I did meet him once. I came back from the New England mission unhappy with the coverage of the Holy Ghost in the series of tracts. We always used to have little pamphlets we would distribute around. We called tracting, dropping these off. And I went to him and I said, we need a tract on the Holy Ghost. He was in public affairs or something then. He wasn't an apostle. And first thing he said, well, what is there to say? And, and then the next thing was, why don't you write it? So that sort of shut me up.
One last one. What about Spencer Kimball?
Spencer Kimball, I met once as a stake president. An incredible experience. We had to, I was the stake president, so we had to meet him. The whole first presidency was coming in those days when they were holding regional meetings. And when I came up to him, he was short, and he put his arm around me and pulled my whole body against his body. And I remembered it was as if, some force had gone through me. And it was quite remarkable afterwards that, because others said how they felt his love. It just radiated from him. It was, one of those things you just don't forget.
So how do you think the view of these apostles and prophets was different back in the day when the church was smaller and, like you said, a whole first presidency could come visit Boston? How do you think that view is different from today? And how have you seen the relationship between the leaders of the church and members evolve?
I mean, it's hard to measure that, but it is certainly a truth that the quorum of the 12 were just on the road all the time. I was brought up in Portland, Oregon, and, it was not at all uncommon to have an apostle come to a stake conference. And I know there was some concern by the end of the 20th century that they were becoming sort of faces at conference, sort of remote figures rather than real life human beings. And so efforts were made, but it's very tough in this age. They're good, really remarkable. All the apostles are at this point in projecting their humanity, their warmth, even in those conference talks. You feel it. So they're very good at it, but it's hard not to be a remote figure on the Mount Olympus when they aren't seen in person very much.
Do you think that there's too much apostle sort of adoration from people far away because they don't know their humanity really as much as earlier generations did?
Well, necessarily so. We admire them, but it's a tough thing on them because if we think they're perfect, that's too much demand of anyone. I mean, a prophet of God, it's just too much to say you can't make mistakes or stumble or make errors here and there. So I think it's a hard burden for them to bear too.
So, Richard, I'm going to take you farther back now. What was the church like in your youth, and how is it different from today?
Well, let me talk both as a historian and as a boy in the 30s. So, and what I can see now as a historian is that we're in the 30s going through a major adjustment. One of two major adjustments over my lifetime. And the major one was diaspora. We had always been gathering up to 1900. Then we said around 1900, we began to say, no, stay in your home. And then without any church policy, really, we began to spread. Claudia's father grew up on a poor farm in eastern Utah and saw it was going nowhere and moved to California. And then his family thought, you've abandoned us. They were angry with him, but they all ended up in California. My father was a fashion artist, did freelance work for Auerbach's and CCMI. And during the Depression, there just wasn't enough work. So he moved to Portland. So she was brought up on the southern Pacific coast. I was brought up on the northern Pacific coast. And the church was aware of this. And were aware that it could lead to problems. So I'll try to wrap this up in a hurry, but what they tried to do is to turn every ward into a village. You know, when we gathered, Zion became not one city, but this network of villages all up and down the Great Basin. And so they tried to do that by creating a church that was loaded with activities. I mean, we went to church almost every day. There's primary, there's mutual, there's Relief Society, there are dances and events on the weekends, and then twice to church on Sunday, morning and afternoon. And so our lives were just loaded with church. And it was also financial, because we not only paid tithing and fast offering, we also paid budget to cover the ward costs, and then building fundraising. So, you know, we were paying 12-15% of our income to the church. So, and then the burden of church work on you is to man all these organizations. Everyone had 2 or 3 jobs. So the church just filled your life. It was just immense. Claudia loves that. She loved all the singing and dancing that went on. I said, yeah, but you don't remember how hard it was to make all those things go.
Do you think something's been lost, though? Because a lot of that is no longer exists. You know, that village, that community's not there.
No, and we don't have, you know, we used to have dance festivals, and we had athletic leagues and a church championship. So there are all sorts of things were bringing us together. And I think that is a result of the second great fact, and that is the globalization of the church. We couldn't have the United States with one kind of church and then little villages in Congo or wherever in the world that could not do the whole thing. So the church had to cut back and simplify and make it possible for every church anywhere in the world to have the full program.
So what have you seen as the most challenging eras for the church? Was it perhaps the 60s and part of the 70s with the priesthood temple ban for black members in place, or maybe women's rights movements?
Yes, I think that's true. You know, the black and the priesthood thing was an embarrassment in the 30s and 40s, but in the late 40s and 50s became a national issue, and then it's painful for everyone, and you know, an immense relief when it's over. But and that was a very tough time, but it hasn't ended. You know, all of the doubts about the church history coming under scrutiny, and everyone wondering about this or that, the versions of the first vision, and so on, and plus all the social issues in women. And that's continued. It's abating now. We're calming down. But through the teens of this century, it's really been rough going.
What about women, the issue of women?
Well, of course, I live with a woman, so I know about it. She has her
feminist
version of things. And that's hard on double counts. 1, the role in the church and the priesthood, and 2, polygamy, which still gnaws at lots of very faithful women. So we're not out from under it by any means. As I say, I do think it's quieting. You know, the temperature has gone down for various reasons, but it's still there.
Do you think the temperature's gone down on LGBTQ issues?
Yeah, a little bit. I'm not right in the center of things, so I don't know for sure. But it's just debating a little bit. We're accommodating. You know, no bishop is going to excommunicate someone who's gay or trans. So we sort of learned to live with it.
So besides those issues we just talked about, what have been some of the biggest sort of internal controversies for the church members? I mean, I think, correlation, also potentially 2-hour church or 3-hour consolidated meeting schedule was like a big, I don't know. What do you think some of the internal, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like there's been some internal ones, not just the national social ones, like, I don't know, leader gerontocracy, stuff like that. What have you seen?
Well, the gerontocracy thing is less of a concern to me. Those old guys got to stick together,
Yeah.
because the organization is so complex and so worked out that you can build around problems with age as it comes along. Women continues to be an issue. Name some more of those, Peggy. Let me react to them.
Consolidated meeting schedule in 1980.
Yeah.
I think that was sort of the beginning of giving up the village a little bit.
Yeah. Well, that's right. Churches become less burdensome, but maybe less interesting too. There are fewer jobs. Our bishop is manufacturing jobs in the ward in order to give someone something to do. Claudia regrets the fact we don't have time to talk to each other. There isn't. We have to kind of find ways to do it. I think this is particularly hard in Utah, where you've got family that draws you away, and you get church from your family as well as your ward. And that's a problem for newcomers coming in. They feel left out. They're not welcome the way they want. So all those things are issues. I don't think those are overpowering issues.
Yeah. I think everything gets exasperated by social media. And so, unlike earlier eras, if there's one controversy in one ward, then it expands out. So was there a time in your lifetime when talk of the second coming really grew bigger, or when, I've heard about the World War II, but there's got to be other eras when people really thought this is it. When you look back on your life, can you see some times where world events seemed more scary than other times?
Well, there's certainly times when it's more a focus of attention. I don't myself connect it to cataclysmic events in the world, the atomic bomb or the Cold War, things like that. But when I was growing up, part of our intense interest in the church, or our intensified interest in the church, was speculation. And the second coming was, a prime target because it's all over the scriptures. It's all through the Doctrine and Covenants. And so if you take them seriously, you keep thinking it could be any time now. So there were guys who made a living out of signs of the times and giving firesides all over the church about this and that. So we got involved in all of that. And then the gathering to Zion, there was a time when we really thought we would be going back to Jackson County. That was sort of a live option. And, when the church began to buy all that property up around Far West, it's coming. I don't know if there are corners of the church where that's still an issue. I currently hear stories that make me think it may be. And President Nelson has sort of been reviving the second coming is near. I would in a way welcome it. I think it's good to be thinking about where we stand in the course of history.
I would say, though, I mean, obviously, world events did affect the churches talk about this, because during the Cold War, I mean, we had the years food storage, we, talk of bomb shelters and, all that stuff, not just going to Missouri, but like sheltering in place, but having a lot of food and conversations about, would you give some of your food to your neighbors? And then
along with
their family would die. I mean, that, I guess it's swept over the church in the same way as the country. You don't hear that the food storage thing so much anymore, but today's events certainly would make you think, gosh, are we on the brink of something here? Maybe we should have food.
Yeah. No, it's amazing how that faded so quickly. My brother-in-law, Crawford Gates, had a bomb shelter under his garage. And things. So. Yeah. I don't, as I say, I don't object to that kind of talk. Maybe you're hearing it more out there. We don't hear a whisper of it. We're too busy getting ahead in the world.
So, Richard, go more to your wheelhouse here a little bit. How do you think the study of Mormonism has changed since historians have been working with more primary documents and the Joseph Smith papers bringing more of those to light? How has that changed?
Well, there have been huge changes there, as you well know, because I was president when the Mormon History Association was formed, and that was, I and Leonard Arrington were really the first generation, Tom Alexander and Jim Allen and so on, of PhDs in history. We didn't have any PhDs in history before World War II. And so they're coming on, they're thinking professionally. And that led to what's called the New Mormon History. And the basic quality of the New Mormon History was it was written not just for church members, but for the whole historical profession. These guys had gotten their PhDs, they had to write papers on Mormonism for a seminar in a secular university. They had to learn to talk to the world at large. And that was the beginning of a shift that is still going on, is really culminating now, of two things happening. One, we became more candid about errors and troubles. We couldn't cover things up. We had to face up to all the facts. And as that has happened, secular historians have come to respect Mormon historians better, and there's a merger. We no longer have enemies of the church. We have polemicists who online are always cutting in our church history, but the professionals around the country who write about Mormonism, the non-Mormon professionals, are very respectful. No effort to cut us down or to undermine our faith in any way. So it's really a very amiable era in church history, considering both. And of course, at the heart of that is the fact that we have learned to face up to our facts and to be very candid.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. Do you still get grief from members for your sort of warts and all telling of Joseph Smith's life and Rough Stone Rolling?
Yeah, I do from time to time. Less than 10 years ago. But there are people who say that Joseph Smith was not a money digger. And still rubs them the wrong way. So,
yeah.
But I don't object to that.
Yeah. Do you think members are better versed now in the church's real history than they were decades ago? Has that helped or hurt the faith ultimately?
Yeah. Well, versed may be the verb, but it also is that they just learn to accept the fact that there will be ups and downs in the story. So it's not just what they know, but their attitude, that our leaders are going to have flaws from time to time, and that does not in any way weaken the force of what they accomplished.
Do you think, though, some have left the church when they've started hearing those stories and they can't accept that there could be like these flaws in human beings?
Yeah. I used to hear people who say, after Rough Stone Rolling came out, well, it's an interesting book for a member, but I wouldn't want a new member to read it. I'd say it's the reverse. The people who have trouble with the book are those who have been brought up in a view of Joseph Smith that's perfection. He's a polished gem, not a rough stone.
Mm-hmm.
So, Richard, how do you see the church's missionary program has changed? You served a mission. How do you think it's changed to today? And what do you think about the influx of global members? I think you mentioned that as a big inflection point in the church. Mm-hmm. Start with the missionary program.
I've read some. I think it is a little weak on church history.
Yeah.
It wants to have Joseph Smith as a prophet, but you just have the Book of Mormon. You read the Book of Mormon, you get a testimony. Therefore, Joseph Smith is a prophet, and that's all. But that is not quite enough. People can join the church, but they can leave very easily because what they're mainly getting is Christ, which is wonderful. It's what they should mainly get. But they can get Christ in lots of churches. So people come to our church and it's fine for a while. They're welcome. And then something comes along and then they drift away and they can go to another church and get so much Christ. There's no sense that we have something special, unusual, and uniquely powerful. I think those stories of Joseph Smith seeing the Lord, receiving the plates, translating, receiving those should be burned into people's memory. So they realize that we have had gifts given to us from heaven that are unlike anything else in the world.
You know, when I was covering the church in 1998 with President Hinckley's visit to Africa, I interviewed so many members there who said they were converted by the Joseph Smith story because the idea of a young boy who spoke to God really resonated with them because they also had mystical experiences and they could relate to that. So I'm saying from an observer point and a reporter point of view, I could see really the benefit of that story in lots of places. So did you ever think that there would be 3 international apostles in the quorum?
It's a natural outgrowth, and I think it's beautiful and wonderful, and I rather think it's going to continue that way. We're getting very good leaders coming up in Brazil, certainly, but also in parts of Africa. I think, at General Conference, it's wonderful to hear people speaking with those heavy accents. I love that. And so, no, who would have guessed it 50 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and it seems to be on its way.
So we've actually, you and I and Dave have talked about this before, but when President Nelson asked members not to use the term Mormon anymore, you said you didn't think more members would judge one another, but in fact they have. And it's a confusing time when sort of the world knows the term Mormon, but then people are not supposed to use it. Now, looking 8 years later, what do you think has been the outcome? And do you think the church would ever go back to that nickname?
It'll be hard to go back suddenly. It may happen gradually. It's hard because you lack a word to use for Mormons. Something, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, fine, but that doesn't fit into the flow. So I don't think that outside writers are ever going to give up on Mormon because they needed it. And there's a lot of people in the church who would like to be able to use it at least sometimes. I appreciate the theme. Let's get Christ into our language more. Church of Jesus Christ. I'm with President Nelson every whit on that. But we don't need to make it a taboo word that, it's a forbidden term because it's so valuable.
Richard, we're living in an interesting era in the United States right now. A lot of polarization. Do you look back on any earlier time as that were more divided than now or less divided? And do you see this divide playing out in the pews?
1790s, but
that even predates you. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I didn't feel the tug and pull of the New Deal, but my father was a Democrat until he joined an advertising agency where the chief said, "We all are Republican," and that avoids lots of problems. So my family is not particularly political. So I don't think there's anything that quite matches it. And it's maybe, as I say, the New Deal in some portions of the church. But it's very, very painful right now. And the trouble is it's ingrained at such a deep level. It's not just a set of ideas in opposition. It's a whole attitude of life and deep concerns about what's happening. Feeling like, I was on the phone with my daughter today. She said she doesn't know how we can avoid civil war. It just goes down so deep. And so I don't know how we're going to get out of it.
What do you think, what could or should the church do to bridge that, if anything?
I don't think they should take a stand and hammer it. All sorts of people take stands and hammer it. I think the one they've done is about as good as you can get. That is, treat each other with respect, civil discourse. And, Joseph opposed slavery, but he was not an abolitionist. The abolitionists were too violent. He found a way of freeing slaves by giving the revenues from the sale of public lands to slave owners. And that was a way of avoiding clash. So I think that's a proper role for the church. I think it also could take a stand on the treatment of immigrants, which I think is inhuman and undermines families. And I think we can follow the Catholic Church. They're pretty good at this sort of thing. And I think we could speak out in favor of kindness.
The last question, Richard. As you look back at your past and look to the future, what's your predictions, your hopes for the church and the country? Do you see anything on the horizon based on your knowledge of where we've all been?
Well, you have to admit it's marvelous that this church started in such an unlikely form and has continually grown. It's now global. It seems to function. My son just finished a mission in Africa, medical missionary. He's a retired physician. And, he's in Kenya, which is the best of the countries, but horrible problems of Kenya. And he thinks that really only the shaping of character that the church does so well, that is the ultimate answer to people able to take responsibility in their families, be kindly to one another, and honest. So I think that's the great hope. But it's a long-term hope. I think one development I truly love, and that is our interfaith interest now. We are now collaborating with our fellow Christians and fellow believers around the world. And that has to happen. We have to form networks of people of goodwill who can bring, working together can bring good things to pass. So I think we made immense headway there. And that's one thing that gives me hope for the future.
Anything else within the church? Owen?
Well, I think women have not yet received their full due. I think there are lots of things we can do. I think women are appearing in more and more in bishopric meetings these days, and that will be a great thing to have happen. That may be where I'm hoping the most.
Well, thank you so much for this fascinating conversation, Richard.
Well, it's a great pleasure to hear your questions. I need to go out and get briefed on what's going on in the city these days.
Such an important vantage point after your years of studying the past and thinking about the future. And thanks to Dave Noyes.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Nicole Weaver, we remind our listeners that they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.